So today on the Network for Sustainable Financial Markets, Meet the Researcher, we have Dr. Sarah Schiffling from Liverpool. So Sarah, why don't we just jump right into it and I'll have you introduce yourself.
Hello, Ikra. Thank you very much for having me. So I'm Dr. Sarah Schiffling and I am a senior lecturer in supply chain management at Liverpool John Moores University in Liverpool, the United Kingdom. So where I am right now, like everybody at home probably, and I'm right in the middle of two Premier League football grounds, which is quite good as I'm a major soccer fan. I am also an international research fellow with the Humanitarian Logistics and Supply Chain Research Institute at Hanken School of Economics in Helsinki in Finland. Originally, just to complete the trifecta of European countries here, I am from Germany. I've been in the UK now since 2009, when I came here to do a one-year master's degree and somehow never left. So I've been stuck here for a while now. My research area is humanitarian logistics. In a nutshell, humanitarian logistics is about how to get aid to people affected by disasters. So that could be floods, that could be earthquakes, tsunamis, that can also be warfare, famine. So any sort of disaster, how do we get aid to people efficiently and effectively? So that is kind of my background of who I am, what I do.
Okay, so just out of curiosity, what sparked your curiosity for researching this topic?
My interest is really in how people and communities interact with supply chains. So the human side, the people side of logistics, if you will. I have done previous research projects, for example, in very small Scottish island communities, so quite remote islands with 100 or even less people. How do they buy their food? How do they sell their food? How do they interact with this global network of supply chains, really? I'm fascinated by the ingenuity of people in crisis situations, by the resilience that communities show in the face of disaster. And I think the human side is something that needs to be appreciated a bit more in logistics and supply chain research. We often have quite a sort of mechanistic approach to what a supply chain is, and we often underestimate the impact of social factors, political factors, all the human elements behind it. So that's really what sparked my interest in working in humanitarian logistics, this interaction between people and the supply chain, much more strongly than what we see in many commercial supply chains.
Yeah, and so kind of, I guess to wrap up this, how did you get into the area? I know you kind of had a bit of a professional background in supply chain, so I'm just kind of curious to see how that transition went.
Yeah, that's actually, I originally got a degree in aviation management, which was great experience, like applying business and management learning in the context of airlines and airports. Then I gained a bit of work experience as an air freight export operator in the aerospace industry and really loved that. I was really fond of the aviation industry. I graduated, unfortunately, in 2009, and the job market in the airline industry was not ideal, shall we say. So I decided to go for a master's in supply chain logistics management based on my prior experience. That was at 1 year in the UK, that's now somehow become 11. I enjoyed working with the aero engine manufacturer Rolls-Royce in their aftermarket services. So we're still quite firmly in the aerospace industry. And then when I started a PhD, I had what I always say is my quarter-life crisis, where I was just thinking about, what am I doing here? I want to focus on an area where I can make a difference. That's not just I can shave off a bit of money here and help an organization make a bit more profit. But it's not really easy to do a good thing if you're a logistician. It's not like I studied something useful like medicine. So that's when I first came across humanitarian logistics. I was reading quite widely of what is there that I can actually do as a logistician? What are the good things in the world that we can do? And that's how I came across this research area of humanitarian logistics and saw that in practice, there's so many issues associated with humanitarian logistics. And there's so much of the money spent in humanitarian disaster responses actually goes into the supply chain, and how important that is. And that it isn't just money, it's saving lives in the end. So I got really interested in seeing, with my commercial background, what sort of approaches, techniques, tools that I knew from commercial supply chains are actually applicable in humanitarian logistics, and why they are or are not applicable. So that was really what drew me into humanitarian logistics in the beginning, that interest in seeing what works, what doesn't work, and why does it not always work.
Oh, perfect. That is literally the perfect segue to jump right into your research. So I'm very, very excited to kind of discuss that. And I think you highlighted it a bit where you're talking about humanitarian logistics. You kind of talked about a bit about what inspired the research over there, but would love to hear more. So I'll just let you take the lead on that.
Will do. I have recently had 2 papers accepted for publication with an amazing team of co-authors. Thank you. I have some really great co-authors, Claire, Yi, and Matt, and together we've worked on these 2 papers, the first of which is already online, The Implications of Complexity for Humanitarian Logistics, a Complex Adaptive Systems Perspective, and that's in the Annals of Operations Research Journal. And the second paper, we're just in the process of getting proofread, and that will be online shortly, that is on Coopetition in temporary contexts, examining swift trust and swift distrust in humanitarian operations, and that is with the International Journal of Operations and Production Management. Both papers stem from this initial question of what makes humanitarian logistics different, or is it different? In the first paper, that complexity paper, we argue that recognizing humanitarian logistics as a complex system is a really important step in developing supply chain design and management strategies that meet the needs of stakeholders. So coming back to my initial idea of the people and the supply chains, how do we meet them, and the importance of recognizing the complexity, the complex adaptive system in humanitarian logistics. In the second paper, the Coopetition paper, we look into the role that swift trust, so very quickly established trust, as you can imagine, in a disaster response situation, we haven't really got time. Okay, over the next 3 years, we shall build up. Do we trust this other organization or maybe not? Do we think they're a bit iffy? Do we like them? That's not really the situation. You've got to make decisions very quickly. So we're examining the role of swift trust and also a sort of dark side, a swift distrust, because the same way that you might decide very quickly, we like these guys, there might also be the situation of, oh no, we do not like this organization at all. And we look at how both of these responses support coopetition. So coopetition being the simultaneous cooperation and competition in the setting of humanitarian disaster relief organizations. So that's the 2 research papers we've got out right now. And both of them work quite closely together because one is kind of fundamental complexity, and coopetition is something that emerges from the complexity, that also contributes to the complexity. So the 2 of them go kind of hand in hand.
Yeah, no, so when I was reading through your paper, kind of one thing that really stuck out to me was the comparison between, what happened in terms of disaster response to Haiti and what happened in terms of disaster response to like the floods in Pakistan. So if you want to kind of elaborate maybe on some of the complexities of the systems that were responding over there, I think that would be very enlightening.
Absolutely. So this complexity paper is based on a case study approach, like you're saying, on the response to Haiti and the response to floods in Pakistan. So we're talking about 2 very large disasters in the same year. So 2010, we've had the Haiti earthquake very early on in the year, and then some month later, we've got huge floods in Pakistan. 2 massive disasters with vast impact on lives, livelihoods, the economy of the affected nations. And we see very different responses. So in Haiti, it is a crisis that was all over the media, all over the world, and that triggered quite a lot of responses in terms of donations. That also had a lot of organizations flooding into Haiti with, success. There's a lot of debate around what Haiti has actually done, and there's a lot of criticism about, even now 10 years later, it's a decade after the earthquake now, and Haiti still has a lot of problems, and there's a lot of people saying that problems might have been exacerbated by the response to the disaster. So we have very, very difficult response there. In Pakistan, we had a response that, kind of because it came after Haiti as well, did not receive as much attention. I mean, media news circles are quite short. We have a very short attention span. So the interest by the media was not really there for another disaster. Here we go again. But also we saw that a lot from donations, that there was a lot less of these sort of private donations of people sitting in front of their television and seeing, oh no, these poor people affected by this disaster. So we had a very different funding level for this. And we also saw that there were a lot of large international organizations responding, but less so these very small new organizations that we found responding to the earthquake earlier on in the year, where people were inspired kind of like, I see this, I need to help right now, rather than going through one of your big organizations for international aid. So we have a very different network of how these responses work and who was involved in these responses. And that was really interesting to study, to see the different elements of complexity there of who you coordinate with. On the logistics side, we've got the logistics cluster system where organizations come together. That is through the UN, so international coordination. And there was a lot of criticism of this system. Are we just wasting our time here? There's some quite juicy quotes from my interviewees on this, who had quite strong opinions on the coordination between different organizations. So we see these two different responses. Some of the elements are obviously the same across disaster responses. We have, for example, the infrastructure being destroyed. That is an issue whether you have an earthquake or you have floods. From a logistics perspective, I have this issue of there's a river there, there's no bridge anymore. What do I do? How do I get there? So we do have a lot of the same challenges, but from the level of complexity, the interactions between different actors, between different stakeholders, we saw a whole different level of this in the Haiti response compared to the Pakistan response.
Okay. And so kind of jumping into, you mentioned a couple of your interviewees. Could you maybe talk a bit about the data, the methodology, and kind of how you guys conducted your research a bit?
Absolutely. So like I said, it was case study approach. And we collected the data for both of these studies through in-depth interviews with actors in humanitarian organizations and through the analysis of publicly available documents. So that could be annual reports, mission reports, press releases, all these sort of things. We chose a qualitative approach to better capture the complexity. Complexity often stems from these interactions between people, and that's something that can be quite difficult to portray quantitatively. So we were really keen on this rich data. Already mentioned there's some juicy interview quotes in there of people having very strong opinions. So that's what we were really after. How do people react in this? How do people interact, particularly if you're looking at the Coopetition paper as well? A lot of that is based on personal relationships. A lot of that is based on, ooh, I know her, I've seen her before, we can work together. So that was quite important for us to have the more organizational perspective versus also the individual perspective from the interviews. In the complex adaptive systems paper, we had the two case studies that were the unit of analysis was the two responses, Haiti versus Pakistan. And for the Coopetition paper, we had the unit of analysis as international humanitarian relief organizations that engaged in cooperation and competitions and competition. For both of the studies, our interviewees were all involved in logistics and supply chain management. They didn't necessarily self-identify as logisticians. So, for example, you might have a pharmacist who is responsible for ordering, stock keeping, storage, and all that, but still identifies as a pharmacist and isn't out there saying, I'm a logistician, this is what I do. But we had people who are involved at different stages of supply chains and logistics activities.
Okay, no, perfect. So kind of, building off of that, I would assume there'd be some challenges that you'd face, especially with, the more qualitative approach to the research and analysis. So kind of how did you overcome those challenges and what were some of them specifically?
So it can be quite difficult to find data and get access to data in this area because, as you can imagine, everybody is terribly busy. Everybody is rushing off to various disasters. So it can be very difficult to have this qualitative data. And it's something that in general in humanitarian logistics, it's often criticized that we don't have a lot of empirical data, but a lot of the papers are conceptual and there's like modeling that's based on just assumptions and not real numbers. And it can be quite difficult. I was very fortunate in that I found interviewees who were really gracious with their time, and several of them are now quite eager to read the paper, so that is great. In the future, what I would really like to do is to work more in depth with a humanitarian organization. It's always a bit of a balancing act because I've got teaching commitments as well. So my bosses would not be very happy with me for just going, hello, I'm off to wherever next. So it needs to be balanced, but I would really like to be more embedded and work more in depth with humanitarian organizations to get an even richer data set. I also have to say, in terms of challenges, I'm only starting out my research career. And to be honest, I found the publication process incredibly difficult. Peer review is a really important process, and it exposes your work to scrutiny and makes you enhance your argument and all that. And many of the reviews were incredibly helpful, but a few times I really struggled to not take criticism too personally. It's like I've dedicated years of my life to this work, so hearing this is not good enough yet, that makes me quite upset. Fortunately, I had a really amazing mentor who helped me out with these sort of things. My university organizes a mentorship program for early career researchers, and that has been so beneficial to me to just have this mentor who reminds me, look, you're not alone. You don't have to somehow come up with a magical solution for all the problems. You have a team of collaborators, work together, you figure out how to address these issues. And she also reminded me very often that nobody's going to get things perfect. First time, got it all perfectly right. Everybody thinks, okay, I'm the most brilliant researcher of all time, so we accept your paper straight away. No, that's just not how it works. It's this process of improving, refining, and learning. So rather than me being useless, it's just that's how the process works. That's how we all go through it. And that was something that was really important for me to learn in publishing these papers, that yes, you have to grow, but having that sort of growth mindset of accepting it's constant learning rather than this all or nothing mindset where either I'm perfect or I'm a complete failure and can do nothing right. So that was a really big step for me in this. And I want to really work on being more willing to admit when I'm struggling and ask for help, because I was totally surprised, and this shouldn't come as such a surprise, that friends and colleagues were really helpful and willing to bounce ideas back and forth and read over something and tell me makes sense or not really. So being open to this, I'm struggling with this, how can we work on this? And I think that's something that I've taken away, not just for research, but in general, just be open, admit your struggles. Nobody is perfect. Nobody expects you to be perfect except for yourself if you're a perfectionist like I am. So that's been really a growth process, and a lot of issues that I faced with this, but I think also a lot of positive stuff that has come out of this process.
No, that's wonderful. And when I saw the 2 publications in 1 week, I was like blown away. So it seems like you got a good grasp on that. So congratulations there.
That just kind of worked out in the end, that they both came through at the same time. One of those papers actually has been, we first submitted that nearly 2 years ago. So it's been a long grind to get to this stage and get it all done. That they were then accepted within a couple of days of each other, that was just a bit lucky timing, very fortunate. I guess some people probably had some time to get it all out at the same time. But yeah, it has been a long road to get there, and it was not easy, especially as well with not being in work, working from home a lot, where I just kind of get into my mind too much and start thinking about, obsessing about all these different issues. So it has been an experience.
Excellent. And then kind of, what do you kind of see is like the impact of the paper? If you could kind of just summarize it in a sentence. Or what would you like the impact to be, I guess, since we can be a bit speculative here.
Let's see what the impact will be. I think that for the complexity paper, what we have shown is that we need to look at humanitarian logistics not in isolation of like a one organization case study, but there are so many systemic issues that this complex adaptive systems perspective is really important, because all the different parts interact with each other, and that we need to, from a researcher perspective, really broaden out our sample to include beneficiaries, political decision makers, commercial suppliers, media, all these stakeholders, to really appreciate the complexity of humanitarian logistics better, which of course runs into the trouble of how do we get data, how do we manage that in a humanitarian context. But I think it's something that our work has shown and has supported other work in this area that would be really important to broaden it out to a systemic view. In terms of the Coopetition paper, I find it really exciting that we've got this element of distrust, because it sounds so negative. Oh, distrust, that's not a very nice thing to have. But what we've actually shown is that distrust is very important to help us manage uncertainties, to help us make quick decisions. And that's a really exciting area of research. And it was actually just been published a paper in the European Management Journal on trust and distrust, where the authors have looked at Swedish firms engaged in co-opetition and also found that distrust plays a really important role in achieving performance from co-opetition. So this is a really exciting area, and I'm hoping that we can contribute to what co-opetition and distrust look like in the humanitarian sector.
Yeah, and if people wanted to, follow up with you, where should they go? What kind of research should they maybe go look into, or resources can they look into if they're, interested in learning more about the topic?
Absolutely. I am pretty easy to find. My name is very rare. So you can get in touch with me on Twitter. I'm at Miss LocOps. And the complexity paper is currently available in open access. So there's no paywall involved there. So even if you're not with the company, university, or subscribes to journals, that is all open. So check that out with the Annals of Operations Research Journal. And I'd really be happy to hear what people think about that as well. The Coopetition paper is not yet online. We've got a bit of proofreading to do with that, but I'll be sure to tweet about when that is online so people can engage with that as well. As for resources on humanitarian logistics, I would recommend having a look at the Humanitarian Logistics and Supply Chain Research Institute in Helsinki. They are really focal point for researchers in humanitarian logistics. And they have great resources there. They do a lot of amazing projects. For example, they maintain a bibliography of all papers published in humanitarian logistics topics. So if somebody's interested in this, you can quite easily do a keyword search there and have all the research that's ever been done in the field at your fingertips. So that's a great hub for research in humanitarian logistics.
Okay, excellent. So I guess kind of we'll jump into wrapping up and looking at the outlook. At NSFM, our thing is really focusing on the next generation, the network for sustainable financial markets, and really kind of pushing, a new future forward. And so what would you say are some of the key challenges for the next generation?
We're facing incredibly complex challenges. I mean, what stands out to me is that many of the challenges we're facing are not these sort of technical problems that can be solved in a strict manner where at the end we have a mathematical solution, this is how it works. But what we're focusing on is social systems problems. They're very often quite ill-defined, confusing, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of different points of views here. That's not a new thing. That's actually an entire strand of research in the late 1960s, early 1970s. There was a lot of research done on wicked and messy problems, which very much stems from a similar sort of idea that in that time period, the world had overcome huge technological challenges. We had manned space flight and all that, but at the same time facing these massive social issues. So that body of work developed, and I think that has a lot of interesting insights for us now that there are ways of approaching these problems. We have to accept complexity, we have to live with complexity, but there are tools available, and there's a body of work that we can build on now that we can use to conceptualize, to understand, and to feel more comfortable with complexity as well.
Okay, and how would you advise the next generation to prepare for these? I know these are very big problems that you brought up, so I think any advice would be greatly appreciated.
I think the key thing is that we need to accept complexity. There's such a temptation to simplify in daily life as well as in research. We all like to just have a very simple problem. If we can just think about right and wrong, good and bad, that is so much easier. That means that I've got a whole lot more time doing what I want to be doing rather than thinking about great problems. But it's very important to understand that it's really so simple. We rarely have a right and a wrong. We have all these shades of grey in between, all these different issues, all these different viewpoints on issues. And I think it's very important to take the time and the effort to account for complexity and to embrace that discomfort that comes with that, because we need to manage with these issues. I think what's really encouraging in a way is, for example, in our complexity paper, we found that it's not just this very complex environment of a humanitarian response impacting on the logistics there, but the reverse is also true. And that's something that personally I take as quite encouraging, that we're not just affected by our environment. It's not just everything kind of coming down on us, but also we have an effect on our environment as well. We influence our environment. What we do, what we say has an impact. And I think that is something to embrace and to give us courage as well, that what we do matters and how we shape our environment is a very important part of the puzzle, even though it feels like I'm one person, I can't do anything, I don't really matter. Yes, you do. We all matter. We all influence our environment. I think that's something to take forward and to embrace in these very difficult times right now.
That is beautiful. I don't think I could have put that any better. So thank you just so much, for the conversation, for all of your insights. I learned, just so much about it, and it was just so much fun, really diving into complex issues. So thank you. Thank you for your time, and, we'll definitely be in touch. It's Miss Logo Op. So,
It's logistics and operations.
Yes. But so it's at MISSLOG.
OPS.
Oh, yes. So if people wanted to follow you, that's where they should go.
That's where they should go. And they get all my insights on soccer and on theatre, and in between also supply chain logistics issues and humanitarian issues. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. But also, if people want to Google me, I am almost always the one that pops up on Google. There's one other person with my name worldwide, but you have a high likelihood of actually finding me. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, and we look forward to maybe seeing you again over here. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and I've really enjoyed having a chance to talk about my research. That's always exciting to have.